A few years ago, a customer came in our workshop and said, "You know, there are only two types of flat roofs, one that will leak and one that will leak in the future." Then he pulled out his Gibson guitar out of his case and added, "There are only two types of Gibson guitars, one that has a broken headstock and one that will have a broken headstock in the future." Now you can have one guess on the reason he visited our workshop that day. To be fair to this guitar, the reason for the headstock break was an on-stage collision between the guitar players. This guitar belongs to the guitar player Jan Petech from the famous Slovenian rock band Joker Out. Now let's dive into this repair. First, I remove all of the moving parts from the guitar, then I assess the damage and see how deep the crack really went. As you can see, it's a bit of an unusual break. It started on the bass side, went halfway through the neck and ended under the fretboard. The whole neck will need to be relacquered again, so the best course of action is to remove everything, including the truss rod nut and the string nut later on. This is the point where you need to be extremely careful when you are repairing a headstock break like this. When I wiggle the headstock, you can see there's a minor crack going alongside the fretboard and the neck. And if you miss a crack like this when you are applying the glue, you basically did all the work for nothing, as the headstock will break again when you put on the strings. So it's very important that you take your time with this step and inspect all of the damages and all of the hairline cracks that follow the main one. Now the next step may seem a bit extreme, but I actually need to break off the headstock even more in order to properly fix it and to make sure that all of the cracks are properly glued up. So here we go. The moment I pulled this headstock off the neck, I noticed a red flag. And let me know if you see it too. Later on I will explain what it is and why I think it was the reason that this headstock broke under such a weird angle. You can see it here, but I will talk about it more a bit later on. Now just for reference, I want to show you how light this mahogany headstock really is. For comparison, here I have my drum key that's about 74 grams or 2.6 ounces for all you Americans, and the headstock weighs about 84 grams, which is just under 3 ounces. So the fact that this paperweight headstock holds 50 kilograms of string tension is pretty impressive. Now this is the red flag that I was talking about earlier. These two wooden dowels made out of spruce were not supposed to be here. My best guess is that this guitar had a hairline crack in the headstock before this break, and somebody tried to repair it by drilling 2 holes vertically and putting these wooden dowels in and just lacquered everything, which is obviously not the way to repair this. Before I glue everything back together, I need to make sure I remove all of the glue residue to the best of my ability, so that when I apply the glue to the headstock and the neck and everything dries, the bond will be as strong as possible. The glue residue is only present on the part where the neck meets the fretboard, as this is where the Gibson factory glued the fretboard onto the neck. Everywhere else it's basically just a clean break through the wood, so I don't need to clean anything up. Now for these types of headstock breaks, I like to use this 2-compound epoxy to glue everything up, rather than your typical wood glue, Titebond for example, which is fine and it will hold, but I tested the strength of this epoxy glue to Titebond glue, and I found out that the epoxy glue is 3 to 5 times stronger than the Titebond glue, plus the epoxy glue is not affected by moisture. Now the preparation time and the cleanup takes much longer when you're using epoxy glue, but if you're gonna sand everything down and relacquer the whole neck, that factor is not important. Some of you might say this is a complete overkill, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. After I apply a generous amount of glue to all of the cracks and crevices, it's time to go to Clamptown. I put the whole guitar into this homemade vise so that I can apply the pressure on top of the headstock so that it fits on the neck under the right angle and to make sure it won't slip when the glue dries. After 24 hours, the glue is all dried up. I can remove all of the clamps and I can continue the next step of carving out the neck and reinforcing the weak points. As I mentioned earlier, there are many hairline cracks going alongside the main crack, so the best way to deal with this is to sand out all of the cracks and insert a stiffer wood instead of mahogany to reinforce the neck in this spot. This might seem like an extreme step, but it's one of those how a sausage is made things, so you just have to trust the process. I should also mention that you need surgical steady hands if you're gonna try this. As I mentioned, I'll be using a stiffer and harder wood to replace the mahogany and to reinforce the neck in this spot, so I chose maple. So to make sure that the maple insert will fit perfectly into the carved out neck, I need to make sure that the maple dowel will be the same diameter as the oscillating sander that I used to carve out the neck. The cool thing is I only need to make one of these wooden dowels, as I can cut it in half and I have the one part for the one carved out part and the other part for the other one. And if you weren't sure what I was talking about, here is the visual presentation of what I was doing. As you can see, the maple inserts fit perfectly into the neck like puzzles. So the only thing to do now is apply the glue and clamp everything up for the night. Well, I won't be using clamps this time, I'll be using surgical tubing, as these inserts fit into the neck under a weird angle and there is just no way to clamp this up, and the surgical tubing is a great way to apply the force evenly across the whole surface. Once again, I am using the same epoxy glue as I did when I pressed the headstock back into the neck. And one of the best things about epoxy glue that I forgot to mention earlier is that it acts as a filler as well. I placed a few wooden dowels into the machine head holes so I can use them as anchors when I'll be wrapping around the surgical tubing. The process is pretty simple. You just tie around the surgical tubing as tight as you can across all of the surface, and I also make sure I change the direction once in a while, and at the end I tie a knot so it doesn't come undone overnight. Once again, I let the glue dry for 24 hours before I continue the work. You'd be surprised on how much force the surgical tubing actually produces when you wrap it around many times. You can try and test it out by wrapping it around your finger a couple of times and you will see it completely stops your blood flow. Well, on a second thought, don't do that, just take my word for it. At this point, this looks like a Frankenstein repair, but you just have to trust the process. This is only the first part of the neck reinforcement. Obviously, this looks really silly in this state, so I need to sand off the bulk of the material on the belt sander. I will leave the fine hand sanding till the very last step, as first I need to put in another reinforcement. Now the next step may again seem a bit drastic to some of you, but after testing many methods on how to repair this kind of breaks and reinforce them, I found out that this is the best method to do it, and I can safely say that even after more than 300 neck repairs I did, no customer has ever returned and said that their neck repair failed. The process is the same as I did on the side reinforcements. I basically sand out a large chunk of mahogany from the neck to remove all of the hidden hairline cracks. And here you can clearly see the two wooden plugs that I mentioned earlier, which is a clear sign that somebody tried to repair this neck in the past. Now I have these main maple inserts made beforehand on a lathe, so I save a bit more time every time I'm doing a neck repair, and I always want to speed up the repair process if possible without compromising the quality, of course. The most important thing with this step is the grain orientation, as this will ensure that the reinforcement is as strong as it can be. The cool thing here is I can cut the maple insert in half, and both the top and bottom part have the correct grain orientation as it was made on a lathe, so I can use one piece on this neck and the other piece on a future neck repair. The rest of it is unfortunately scrap wood as it has improper grain orientation. And again, the same process of applying the glue to the neck and the reinforcement part and then clamping everything up. Now, of course, I'm careful here not to apply too much glue here as I don't want it to spill all over the truss rod. But if that were to happen, it's not a problem. I oiled up the truss rod beforehand so the glue cannot stick to it. So if there is any spillage, I can easily clean it up. After 24 hours, the glue had enough time to cure and I can remove the bulk of the material on the belt sander. And now comes the fun part of hand carving the neck. I place the guitar in a vise that's padded on both sides so it's not moving around when I'm filing it. I start carving the neck with a very rough file at first to get the rough shape of the volute in place, and then I move on to a finer file to get all the details dialed in. Once I'm happy with the shape of the neck, I can move on to sandpaper. I start by using 150 grit and move all the way up to 400 grit sandpaper so everything is smooth and all the edges are clean, and also to make sure that there are no deep scratches in the wood when I start the lacquering process. I also clean up the truss rod pocket of any glue residue, even though this place may only be seen by me and any other guitar technician that might be setting up this guitar in the future. But I always like it when all of the details are done precisely and with care, as I think this is what sets apart amateurs and professionals. It's the attention to details. And if you're asking yourself why did I reinforce the neck with maple on a mahogany neck, it's because maple is much stronger than mahogany, and this neck will be painted in vanilla finish, so it would be completely silly to reinforce the neck with a weaker wood like mahogany, as the grain orientation won't be visible anyway, because the neck will be completely painted. So now that it's time for the relacquering process of the neck and the headstock, I want to share with you a short story about a guy that came to our workshop a while ago and how he inspired me to start this YouTube channel. So there was this guy, let's call him Dwight for the sake of this story, and Dwight came in with his guitar and said he wants to repaint his guitar in a high gloss dark color. To which I replied no problem, as we do all kinds of modifications on guitars and this was nothing out of the ordinary. And then Dwight proceeded to hit me with one of the biggest red flags you can hear from a customer if you are providing a service to them, and he said, "This should be an easy job and shouldn't take more than an hour. I could have done this myself, but I just don't have the time to do this." And again I replied, no problem, that's why we are here. And I explained to him how the relacquering process usually goes, everything step by step, from the initial sanding and applying a base coat, the curing time, and then the final coat and all of the coats in between, and all of the sanding and curing time between all of the coats. And I explained to him he can choose between a different type of lacquer like nitro or polyurethane based lacquer. And while I was explaining this to him, I could see it in his eyes and on his face. It was the first time he was hearing this and he was not really believing the words I was saying. Dwight then told me I'm way overcomplicating things and this repair shouldn't take more than an hour and shouldn't cost more than $20, as the whole guitar will be painted black anyways. Needless to say, he just couldn't be convinced that that's just not possible.
Why isn't it possible? It's just not. Why not, you stupid bastard?
So I kindly told him that $20 doesn't even cover the cost of the materials, let alone the skill and the labor involved to do this kind of job. So Dwight picked up his guitar and left our workshop that day, but that whole interaction got me thinking. Is there an easier way to show our customers what kind of work and how much work is actually needed to achieve this kind of quality in the work that we provide? And then it hit me. Why don't I just record the repairs we do and all of the work involved? So if any potential customer comes in and requires any kind of work that I've already done a video on, I can link them the video and they can see the quality that we provide and the work that is needed to achieve it. So this was the story about a guy named Dwight one of the main reasons why I started this YouTube channel. Now back to this repair. After the lacquer has completely cured, I need to lightly sand off the edges of the fretboard and around the nut area, so when I pull off the masking tape, I don't chip out the new lacquer. For the final cleanup, I take a sharp knife's edge and lightly scrape the excess lacquer and then round everything up with 400 grit sandpaper. Now it's time to polish up the frets. I first wipe down everything with industrial alcohol, or naphtha I think Americans call it. Then I fine sand all of the frets till 6000 grit before I use extra fine steel wool wire, which is always fun to say, before I polish every fret up individually. The final step is to apply a protective coat of oil to the fretboard. I used lemon oil this time, but you can use any type of wood oil you prefer. Just make sure you wipe off the excess when you're done. I can almost see the finish line with this repair. I just need to reassemble everything back together and then set everything up. The good thing is that the nut is still high enough and it doesn't need to be replaced, as the frets were in good condition and we are still using the same string gauge. Placing the bushings back in the headstock is pretty easy, you just have to make sure you don't scratch the new finish. Deburring all of the holes is necessary, as you don't want to crack the new lacquer when you push the machine heads back in the headstock or when you tighten up the screws. This little piece of pickguard was holding on to dear life, so I decided to rescue it and attach it back to its motherboard. This is the same story as it was with the headstock and the wooden plugs. Somebody already tried to repair this, and I'm thinking he didn't even remove the whole pickguard from the guitar, he just pulled the screw out and applied some CA glue on top of it. The guitar will be equipped with Elixir 1046 nano web strings, and I gotta say that the design of this tremolo arm is one of my favorites. The final step is to set up the guitar. That includes setting up the height on the nut, adjusting the truss rod tension, setting up the correct string height from the specifications of the customer, setting up the intonation point and the pickup height, before the final step of putting on the truss rod cover back on, which concludes this repair. Here are some final shots of the finished repair. I'm really happy with how everything turned out, from the reinforcement to the finishing process. I will have 2 short sound demos playing at the end, and given the fact that this guitar belongs to Jan from Joker Out, I decided to play one of their riffs in the sound demo. If you would like to see more of this type of content and support the channel, the best way is to share the video with others or become a member here on YouTube or on Patreon. I will have all of the links down in the description, and if you want to send your guitar in for a repair or evaluation, feel free to send me a message on email or visit our workshop. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.